this afternoon. When we have speakers and come to the conference, we always ask them to send their bios and a picture. So our next speaker, Shawn sends in his bio, and I want to read you the bio that he sent us. Shawn has been the owner and president of Northern Exposure Sporting Group since 2009. So we did a little work on our own just to pad that just a little bit, because we thought perhaps that was a little bit too brief of an introduction. The company is a full-service corporate and field sales support organization to the outdoor sporting goods industry. It represents leading companies in the outdoor sporting goods market, including Evolved Harvest Seeds. Previously, Shawn served as national sales manager with Maurice Sporting Goods, Canada's largest mass merchant retailer. Before becoming the national sales manager, Shawn held the position of national account executive, working with Canadian Tire on the management of the hunting, marine, fishing, and outdoor adventure categories. We're pleased that Shawn was able to join us today to speak on the issue of food plots, so please join me in welcoming Shawn Hannah.
All right, we're all set. Thanks for the introduction. Better than mine. So we're going to talk about food plots today. More specifically, we're not going to talk straight up food plots. What I wanted to do when I went through this is I wanted to take the opportunity, and I thought through, what would be the best way to really cover off food plots. I work a lot of trade shows all over North America, and I get more questions about food plots than anything else. People ask me, what would you plant? When would you plant? How would you plant? What exactly would you do? And so what I wanted to do was take more of an Ontario-based approach. I grew up in Eastern Ontario, north of Kingston, on my great-grandparents' farm. There hasn't been anything done on my great-grandparents' farm in probably over 30 years since I was a kid. So what I wanted to do was take a look at specifically a piece of property within that, formulate a plan, and then walk everybody through the process that I would take from start to finish on a food plot. Now, in a lot of cases, that has a lot more to do with other things than besides just the food plot itself. This is who we are. We're Northern Exposure Sporting Group. Like it was introduced, we represent a lot of products. We're their manufacturer's representative for sales and marketing in Canada. So Evolved Habitats, Cryptek Clothing, Barnett Crossbows, Howell Rifles, Wildlife Research Center, Do All Outdoors, LEM. So we do a lot of stuff every day with a lot of different companies in specifically the hunting and shooting sports categories. But I'm not a biologist. I don't pretend to be a biologist. But I have learned some things, and that's exactly what I want to share today. The problem is with me is not being a biologist, I don't really have a lot of background or know where to start. So one of the very first things I did when I went here is I said, well, who do I know that is a biologist? Well, we pay these people called the Ministry of Natural Resources to be our biologists for our province. So that's where I default to, and that's where I went. So I took a look at specifically what are the goals that the Ministry of Natural Resources has set for our properties that we have, and how do they want to manage the properties? So when I'm setting my own wildlife management goals for my own piece of property, how do I work within that framework to establish food plots? So here's the 3 goals. Pulled this right off the Ministry of Natural Resources website. The first one is to protect and sustain wildlife populations and their habitats to ensure the health of wildlife. Yeah, of course we all want to do that. That's essentially what food plots are. The next one is to manage the use of wildlife to meet the needs, to present future needs of Ontarians. Exactly. We all hunt and fish, so we want to do that. We want to manage the wildlife for the future opportunities. So we'll go through that. And finally, we want, ensure the cultural, social, economic, hunt, fish. That's what we care about. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to really dissect, though, those first 2 areas of the plan, is to protect and sustain. Here's why we do food plots. There's a small graph on the screen that really talks about protecting and sustaining wildlife populations throughout the year. This is really graphing the body mass index of wildlife over an annualized period. If you look across here, this is the condition of wildlife as they come out of summer. They're at the highest point of their wildlife conditioning. So that's when they have everything to eat, they're putting on weight, they're gaining weight, they're going into winter. If you go through a winter like we have this year, this is what happens. The wildlife in our area, and especially in Ontario, have very tough winters. Typically, if you were to sit in front of a presentation made by a lot of my counterparts in the southern US, completely different presentation on food plots, because they don't have the same type of wildlife behavior that we have. When I talk to my counterparts in the southern US who do a ton of food plots, they don't know what a deer yard is. They've never seen a deer yard. They've never heard of a deer yard. Deer don't yard. The deer stay exactly where they are all year long, and they walk from a bedding area that's been predetermined. They know where that bedding area is. They feed in a giant egg field, and then they walk back and go to sleep in a different area. So we deal with unique characteristics in our area, and that spot at the bottom that's circled red is really our danger zone. If our turkeys, deer, partridge lose too much body mass index through the winter, we don't just lose fawns, horns, or young poults. We lose animals. The deer die. The animals die. And that's why food plots, although they're not used as heavily in our area, are critical to the success of animals. It's that area and why we want animals to get better. This is ideally what we want to create on our own small piece of property to protect and sustain the wildlife populations. You want to minimize the impact of winter on those animals. You want the body mass condition coming out of the winter period to be at its peak. You don't want your animals losing, you want them maintaining. Now, that is a little bit unrealistic in Ontario. We're never going to get to a point where our animals don't lose. But there's been several studies done that show that this conditioning right here, as they come out of summer, is just as important as it is what they eat through the winter. The better condition an animal is going into the winter season, the better they're going to survive winter. And that's where we're going to benefit from the food plots, is in that place right here at the end of summer. The more plots we can put in place, the more food we can have available for animals, the better the herd health is going to be going into the next season. Here's what we deal with in Ontario. Everybody's seen this as a typical picture, a hardwood forest in the middle of winter in Ontario. There's really three things that you need to provide to animals in order for them to thrive and grow, and that's food, cover, and water. If you have food, cover, and water on an annualized basis, you will always have animals. But if you look here, in Ontario, we have no food. Hardwoods are great. They're beautiful. I love to hunt hardwoods, but they're an ecological desert. There's nothing in them. They drop acorns a part of the time. They don't really provide a great bedding area for animals. It's open, so there's not real cover, and the water all freezes. So that's our challenge in Ontario, is we have no food, cover, or water. So when I look at a piece of property, I want it to have all three of those things as I think about a plan for my food plot. This is a picture from one of the farms right near where my great-grandfather's farm is that we're going to go into. I don't know if anybody knows Eastern Ontario, but we're at the eastern side of Bob's Lake. This is at the western side of Bob's Lake, so very close. This is a turnip plot that was planted early in the season. This picture was taken, I think, early January before we got a real heavy snowpack. But there's tons of deer there. There's tons of deer there because there's tons of food there. And that's primarily what we're trying to do. We're trying to create an area that has food to sustain our deer and get them into the next area. So here's the farm. This is a chunk of property on my great-grandparents' farm. It's a satellite image of that farm. So I'm just going to break this down for everybody so you can see exactly what you're dealing with. Again, it's a winter photo. That's done on purpose because that's really where and what we really need to look at when we're talking about Ontario, which is a little bit unique. So food, there's really not a lot of food here. So this first area on the northwest corner, that's a small stand of oaks. So it's productive every other year because it's red oaks, it's not white oaks. So red oaks drop their acorns every other year, not every year. And it really only produces a lot of food in that window of, late September to mid-November. So not a lot of food in that area. Here's a white oak stand. So it's producing acorn food every year. So there's a little bit there, but guess what? That's it. That's all the food we have. That's hardwoods and some pines, but the majority of it, there's no food. Cover, we got some thermal cover from pines down in the south central portion of the property. So there's decent cover there. This area that's highlighted in orange that just came up, that area, when I was 8 years old, so about 30 years ago, that area was logged. So I can remember probably 20 years ago, 15 years ago, this section of the property had tons of deer. Deer everywhere because we had all three things. We had food from the logging, we had cover, and of course we have tons of water. So there's good cover there because now those trees that are in the area are not big open hardwoods. So there's decent cover there. And then here, this is a south-facing ridge line. So this is a big high ridge that runs along here. There's some pines and thermal cover runs on the south-facing slope of that. And this is the one area in this is probably about a 300 to 400 acre block that actually has some really great cover. Because the deer yard there, in non-real harsh winters. In harsh winters, they leave completely, of course. But they tend to yard in that area, so there's some decent cover there. And then, of course, we have an overabundance of what everybody else has in Ontario, especially eastern Ontario, and that's water. So this is a real big swamp. We have water everywhere. That's Dan's Swamp, great waterfowling place, these old beaver ponds. But it's flooded timber, so fairly new pond. All softwood maples have all died off there now, but tons of water. The whole front part's water too. Oh, yep, that bottom south covered, yep, that's water. And then this is water too. So we have an overabundance of water. The water is actually taking away from some of our huntable locations as we look at what's there. So that's the area. That's what I've got to deal with right now when I'm thinking about this food plot. So I've got some food, but not very much. I've got okay cover, and I've got lots of water. So that's the very first thing I need to think about when I'm thinking about my food plot is what's going to be my plan. I need to look at what's there and what I need to do to get past that. I missed some more water. So the whole idea here is that we need to protect and sustain the wildlife through the year. It's hard to sustain those wildlife without food. Food is that critical element. When I'm putting together not only food plots, but I'm thinking about my own hunting plan for the fall, one of the things I always try and do is I hunt the limiting resource. So in an area, I'm very fortunate to hunt all over North America, and one of those things when we go to a new spot and we're putting out tree stands and that kind of stuff is we want to hunt the limited resource. Because if it's water, they're going to go to water. If it's food, they're going to go to food. If it's cover, they're going to go to cover. In Ontario, typically in hardwood forested environments, the limiting resource is food. Almost always the limiting resource is food. This is actually a trail camera picture. I'm going to go back there. This is a trail camera picture taken across the road from my house now. I live maybe 35 minutes from here, between Guelph and Georgetown. But this is here in southwestern Ontario where we have a ton of food. In addition to that, this is a small food plot. These are trails that we've planted and grown throughout some really good cedar cover. And you can see the condition of this deer. I don't know if you can read that, but that's actually, I think, September 9th. But this deer is in fantastic condition. He looks like a steer. His body condition is awesome. he's just a great deer, and that's all relative to the quality of food that he has. So the next piece of the food plot plan that we need to think about is how we're going to manage the use of wildlife for our present need and our future need. I take this in more probably broader sense terms than most people do, and when I look at the manage the use of wildlife, because when I think about wildlife, I'm not just thinking about deer, I'm thinking about how I manage all the wildlife on that property, including the trees and the water and everything else that's on that piece of property, and how I'm going to manage that for my personal future needs. Because everybody's needs are different. So you need to think about that as you're thinking about what you want to achieve in your own area. This zone, actually, I don't know if anybody knows Zone 67 in Eastern Ontario, but it's actually a huge zone. It's probably one of our largest wildlife management units in Ontario, except for the big ones up in northwestern Ontario. But the issue with when we look at the management plans that have been put in place by Wildlife Management Unit, is they're really in aggregate for that total area. What we're trying to do is take that macro plan and manage it down to a micro level for our own personal needs. So these are my needs. This is what I want to achieve out of this piece of property. I want increased wildlife sightings. That's what I want. I've got 3 young boys that absolutely love looking at pictures and looking at animals. So trail cameras, great resource for the kids. I want more fawns. Selfishly, I want more fawns because I want more deer on the property. I want better turkey hunting in the area. I want higher deer numbers in October. Why do I put that there specifically? Because if you saw that piece of property, we have acorns, so we get a lot of deer through November when the acorns are dropping, so that's when the deer come on the property, the bucks are cruising, they're moving through the hardwoods, but we don't get them in October, and as a bow hunter, my opening day is October 1st. That's when I love to hunt, is early in the season. So I want more deer numbers and higher deer numbers in October. I want more chases in November that start on our property and stay on our property. I'm a traditional hunter in Ontario. I love the sound of dogs. I like to hear the dogs run. And I want the dogs to start on our property and end on our property. I don't want the dogs to pick up a track of a deer that walked through our bush the night before and end up on the neighbor's property. So that's what I want to try to achieve with my food plot. And I want a chance of killing a 12-point deer. That's an arbitrary number. I just want a big deer, that's all, from Ontario. So in order to do that, as I look at how I'm going to manage that piece of property, that 400 acres is really too much for me to handle. It's too much for me to handle on a yearly basis. So what I've done is I've tried to break it down. I've broke it down into 3 distinct sections of about 150 to 100 acre pieces so that I can manage it a little better. So this is that chunk that says year 1 right up there. That piece in year 1, that's about 100 acres. So now I've zoomed in on that piece. So if you remember what was here, we had that high hardwood ridge that had the coniferous cover down here. We had the water here, more water here, more water here, some water here. And then that small stand of oak trees, obviously, that had some food on it as well. So what am I going to do first? What am I going to do first on the property? Well, I don't know if you could see that if I back up. You can see there's a white line, and now I'm turning that white line red. That's an old logging road. That's an old logging road that existed from about 30 years ago when the property was logged. And the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut that logging road out. I'm going to cut the logging road out, and I'm going to turn that into a food plot. I don't care what I plant on it. Honestly, anything is better than nothing right now. There's no food in this piece of bush at all. So as soon as I cut those trees down, I'm benefiting the wildlife in the area because there's going to be shoots that come up. There's going to be any type of thrown grass. I could put grass from my lawn down there, and it's more than what's there now. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this area out. So that's the first food plot I'm cutting out of the piece of bush. It's a small food plot. It's between 2 ridges in a low-lying area. It's not very big. It's probably half an acre. The reason I'm doing it there is because it's in this area of Eastern Ontario. It's pretty hard to put a food plot on top of a ridge. These ridge tops, are either very, very poor quality soil or they're rock. That's just the way it is in Eastern Ontario. There's no real good soil there. It's not Western Ontario. So the best place to put these food plots are in the lower lying areas where there's been a collection of nutrients, where the soil is going to need less amendments. It's going to need less fertilizer. It's going to need less things to make the plants grow. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get the most out of the property that I have, because we can always make the acreage we have produce more, and that's always way easier than creating more acres. Because we either have to cut out more food plots out of this place, or we have to get a land stretcher, and I haven't found one yet. And we don't have one. So the next food plot I'm going to build here is a little bit bigger. It's probably an acre and a half. I'm putting it in again on the bottom of this big ridge between the other ridge, and they're all strategically placed right beside the access points. And that's for a reason. That's so I can get in there with a four-wheeler or something of that nature to help me. And the final one is over here on the southeast side, because I want to have another area. It's low-lying again. It's got good access in and out. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm not going to just focus on food plots. I'm cutting this with the chainsaw. I'm doing timber stand improvement along the south-facing slope of that ridge line, primarily to improve both the bedding area, but also to give the deer more food. Because as I go in there and I cut those trees down, I'm going to use hinge cutting. I'm going to hinge cut those trees and let them stand and provide cover, and new shoots come up. I'm going to do what's called hack and squirt. Does anybody know what hack and squirt is? It's where you take a hatchet on the smaller type trees. You would cut a 45-degree angle into the tree, and then you'd spray in there some glyphosate, Roundup. Kills the trees. Trees stay standing dead, but opens up the forest canopy, allows the light to penetrate. Natural forbs and grasses will grow, more shoots will grow, more food, more deer, more turkeys, more partridge, more everything. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm putting in an area where I can not only create more cover, but also have more food. Again, a little bit strategic in my plan and how I'm doing this. If you'll notice, this is a very, very high ridge on top of here, and this is almost a bluff down along this side. So as animals bed in here, in order to get to my multiple food plots that I've now planted, they're going to either have to travel down along here or down along here. And so I'm not only thinking about where I'm going to put the plots, but how I'm going to use the plots. How am I going to hunt the plots? What am I going to do with those plots? Because I want to use them not only to sustain the wildlife, but I'm managing it for my own personal gain at the same time. And of course, as a hunter, that's my primary goal. This area is slated for a burn. That's my next attempt on this property. That area is an old dried up beaver pond that was, it probably hasn't had very much water in it, but has some water in it. It's there in the early spring, and then it dries up. I want to burn that area. Why do I want to burn it? Because I want more food. And I don't want to plow everything up. I don't want to plant everything. I want to burn it so the natural grasses and forbs come back and provide more food to the wildlife in the area. Native grasses for the turkey growth, for the partridge growth, back to those original assessments. So that's my plan. That's what I'm going to try and accomplish out of this piece of property. I want to plant 3 small food plots. I want to do a burn, and I want to do some timber stand improvement. So it's a lot more than just the food plot, because if we looked at it just from the food plot perspective, we probably wouldn't be doing everything we can do for that piece of property. And that's my goal. The first year is I want to maximize this piece of property. So if I'm running out of time and I can do nothing else, I'm going to actually take the chainsaw. I'm going to start cutting. The chainsaw is probably the wildlife, the amateur wildlife manager's best friend. That's probably the biggest tool that you can use. These are actually pictures of that first area. So if you go back here, I hit the wrong button. This right here, there's actually a small tree stand sitting there. It's a small permanent stand that my dad put in. And these were taken this past fall when I was sitting in that tree stand. So that's the area. That's how I know the area, is because I've actually put boots on the ground and I've gotten out and I've walked the property. So you can't formulate a plan for your food plots just from a satellite photo. You need to get out there, put your boots on, and walk the property. So I've got some pretty decent things I can deal with. I'm going to cut, here's that rocky side hill again that has some oaks on it. That's actually a standing oak tree right there, red oak. So I'm not going to cut that because obviously it provides some food. But all of these other small timbers are all coming down. I'm cutting them out as soon as the first chance I get. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm burning. I'm going to burn all that brush in place. And here's why. Several studies have shown, and they're continuing to do this, but wood ash can significantly reduce the soil pH. We need that typically in the woodland areas of Ontario. The process of leaf litter decay, the amount of water we get a year tends to acidify the soil greatly. So anytime that we can work that acidification back to around a 7 pH level, that's going to benefit our food plots. The reason deer prefer food plots typically over natural vegetation is simply because when you put the work in to amend the soil and get the soil right and put fertilizers and balance the pH, those plants take up more nutrients. The greater nutrient uptake in those plants will draw more animals into your food plot than they will naturally be drawn to the native vegetation. That's why we do it. That's why they're drawn to it. It's also going to reduce leaf litter. The burning is going to burn off the leaf litter. I'm all about saving myself work. So the less raking I need to do in that area, the better. So the burn's going to do that. It's also going to help kill the cutoffs. If I can get the temperature high enough on the burn, then those cutoffs are not going to sprout back. It's going to do a better job for me in creating that food plot. Just use caution when you're burning. Obviously, make sure you have your permits in place. Make sure your local authorities know what you're going to do. And if you don't have experience with controlled burn, find somebody who does. There's a lot of great foresters out there. The regional forester can be a big help in this area. And there's also a lot of private guys out there that are doing work on the side as well to help manage. The next piece, I don't know if anybody's noticed this, but I really haven't talked specifically about seeds and food plots and anything yet. Like I don't know how far are we in, but we haven't really talked about what to plant, when to plant, all that kind of stuff. And that's, that's important because what you plant, when you plant, is a lot less important than doing the pre-work and figuring out a plan for your piece of property and how you're going to utilize that piece of property to your benefit. The next thing that I want to talk about is mineral sites. Mineral sites are a key component of your management plan. They're a key component because they hold animals. Especially in Ontario, they probably are more important than other places, simply because when the deer move to the deer yards in the wintertime and they come back, they have a need for mineral. They have been held up in an area. They've been eating low-quality forage, typically white cedar browse. They're lacking minerals in their system. Mineral utilization is going to be your heaviest in spring, summer. One of the questions I get all the time is people say to me, hey, I bought a bag of deer cane and I put it out in the fall and nothing hit it. But then I went back next year and there was a giant pit in the ground where I put the deer cane. And that's because animals like deer really utilize the mineral in spring and summer. As they eat green leafy vegetation, they get a buildup of potassium in their system. They need the mineral and sodium to balance off that potassium, and so they crave it, which means if you don't have it on your property, your deer are going to go looking for it somewhere else. So if you don't have mineral sites, you're encouraging your animals to leave. At the same time, you want to encourage animals that are migrating back from the deer yards to stay. So the mineral sites are important on both those sides of the coin. You want them to stay when they come and not leave to go look for it somewhere else. They also provide a great area to do camera surveys. I'm going to talk a little bit next about camera surveys, but there's a lot more information out there. A great website I go to often. It's a daily webisode. Well, not daily. It's a weekly webisode. It's growingdeer.tv. Dr. Grant Woods, wildlife biologist, he puts a show out every week and talks about all kinds of wildlife management things. I don't sponsor him in any way. He doesn't use any of our products. I just really like his show and think he's a great wildlife manager. These are two trail camera pictures, again, from my property at 2 mineral sites being utilized really heavily by does and fawns. Does and fawns use mineral just the same as bucks do. So here's where I'm setting up my mineral sites. I don't know if you can see the blocks, but they're going to be set up on the north side of my food plots, adjacent to access areas, so they're easy to access, and I'm going to set up some camera locations in those sites. I'm going to use the mineral sites as a survey point so that I can monitor my own animal herd. I can monitor the health of my deer, I can monitor the health of the turkeys, and everything else that's using the area. 2 reasons. One, I want to know, after a winter like this, for instance, what my own management goals are for my property outside of what the ministry has set. I've come to the realization in this zone 67 that I'm probably not going to get a doe tag for the next 5 years. I think last year the draw percentage in the area was about 12%. So it's a huge area. But in our own little section, we actually have quite a few does in the area. But I need to set my own management goals specific to this piece of property. When you're doing a camera survey, the recommended survey to get the results, and I'm going to take you through a little bit of a math thing here in a minute, but it's 1 camera for every 100 acres is typically what they recommend. So that 1 camera for 100 acres, a lot of studies have been done in the U.S. to show that 100 acres is about the typical size of the home range of a whitetail. So you can get a good understanding within that 100 acres per camera site, if done correctly, exactly what's living in that area. So what you want to do from a camera survey standpoint is you want to bait for 10 days prior and count for 14. So you're going to bait for about 24 days prior to. Strategically, again, if I'm thinking about how I'm going to do this when I set up my own camera survey, I'm probably going to start doing this mid to early September. I'm going to do it because I want to have as many animals coming to those locations, those bait site locations, prior to that October 1st hunting season as I possibly can. I want to have the highest concentration of animals there in early October, which was one of my stated goals. So I'm going to have that bait there. In this area, the deer don't eat corn very well. There's not a lot of cornfields. They don't know what it is. So I'm probably going to use corn because once they do start eating it, it's a high draw. But I'm probably going to sweeten it a bit. I'm going to sweeten it probably with sugar beet crush because I get that for free. But I may use molasses. I may use something else to try and get the deer to eat the corn. Once they start eating the corn, I mean, we all know there's nothing that draws like corn once the deer learn about corn. You'll notice I took it off here, the burn area. So the burn area was on here, and then I took it off because I don't know if I'm going to get to do the burn before this fall. I probably won't get to do the burn before this fall, but I still need to have it in my plan and thinking about it, but I don't want to impact my camera surveys this year because I'm trying to get an idea of what deer are there, and if I burn that area, then I'm going to get a higher concentration of food in that area, then I'll have my food plots. So I don't know if everybody's getting this theme here, is that it's all about thinking through and making decisions about your piece of property, and it changes all the time. So this is the deer survey. You can get this. This is off the QDMA website, Quality Deer Management Association website. And essentially what this is you're trying to get an assessment of what's out there. I don't know how many people sat through the moose thing this morning. But in the moose thing this morning, they actually went through what the wildlife biologists do when they're talking about moose tag allocation and how that's going to work and how many tags are going to be available and all that kind of stuff. That's exactly what this is. This is, I don't have the ministry's program to calculate those numbers, but that's exactly what this sheet is. It simply counts the number of unique bucks that you see on the camera. Why unique bucks? Because on the camera, you can tell a uniqueness of the buck through his horns. So you use that kind of as the baseline of your number to then determine the number of does in your property, and then all that plays down to your buck to doe ratio, your doe to fawn ratio, your number of does, number of fawns per does. Because for me, remember, one of my goals was to increase the number of fawns. So I want to know how many fawns I have per does, because I want to be able to track that over a trend to determine if what I'm doing is right. Am I doing the right things on my piece of property? Am I growing the number of fawns? Is my recruitment staying the same year to year? Is it getting less or more? So food plots. So now we're going to start talking specifically about the food plots. First thing is, food plots are just one tiny little small piece of the total management plan on your property. If I go back to that piece of property, you can see that there's not a whole lot of food plots in this 100 acres. I think if anybody's keeping track of what I said for size, there's about 3 3/4 acres total for this 100 acres. Now, if I combine that with the food that I've created here and the food I've created here, I am right around 8 to 10%. So that's about the benchmark you want to do for your piece of property. You want to have about 8 to 10% of your property in food plots. And many, many studies have shown from a lot of wildlife managers and biologists that about 8 to 10% of your property in food is going to significantly increase the carrying capacity of your property and increase the annual utilization of that property. On those specific pieces of property that I'm looking at, I have no food now. So even if I created one small food plot, I'm going to significantly increase my property. So anything is better than nothing. So anything you can do to give your animals more food is always good. Always get a soil sample done. You can see it later. I actually say make friends with a farmer for a lot of reasons. But the soil samples are going to tell you what needs to be done from a soil perspective. They're going to give you, what your pH level is, probably your maximum yield. So if you were to plant, if you're going to plant soybeans, it would tell you what your maximum yield inputs would be to gain your maximum yield, your average yield, all those types of information. You may never even use the soil sample, but at least you'll know why nothing is growing if you get one. Because that's typically what happens is people don't know. They don't know why their plants aren't growing, and the soil sample is going to tell you why. Most annuals, and I put this in here and I'm going to show you on the next slide, but most annuals, so everybody knows the difference between an annual and a perennial, right? Annuals have to be replanted every year, and a perennial comes back year after year. So we have two different types of food plots. We plant annual food plots, like the farmers plant, soybeans, corn, wheat. That's an annual, comes back year after year. Annuals take less soil amendments to grow successfully, so you don't need to have really good soil. You can pour fertilizer on it, and it'll suck up that fertilizer and grow quick and fast, and it's great. That's the benefit of an annual. A perennial, yes, it theoretically will come back year after year after year, but you have to get your soil right. If you don't get your soil right for a perennial, your perennial is not going to do well, and you'll find you'll have to replant year after year. Always plan ahead of a forecasted rain. It's critically important. We don't have that issue as in many places of Ontario, but other places where it's really dry, the germination of plants is very important, especially on bigger seed. The bigger the seed, the more important it is to plant ahead of a rain. Those large seeds like a soybean or a pea seed or a forage oat, if it sits on the ground, birds will eat it, plus it will rot. So the more you can plant in front of a rain, the better. And always prepare a seed bed. A prepared seed bed may be as simple as raking it with a rake, but always prepare the seed bed. The more you prepare the seed bed, the better success you're going to have. Again, this was my plan to manage the use of wildlife. So this is again what I'm trying to do. So let's get right in now into what I'm going to plant on that map. First thing I'm always recommend to everybody when we're talking about food plots, one of the easiest plants there is to plant, the best utilization in the spring of the year, it's king of tonnage in the spring, is clover. Clover blends specifically. The reason we plant a blend is because blends provide the best opportunity for failure, if I'm saying that right. if you planted a single solitary clover, the way that a farmer plants a single solitary bean in the field, and you don't get something just perfect on your food plot, you could have total failure in your small food plot. A blend eliminates failure. If you have 5 or 6 different types of clover in a blend, you're going to have better opportunity for success. So a clover blend is a cool season cultivar. It's a nitrogen fixer. It's a legume, just like a soybean is a legume. So it returns nitrogen to the soil, which is important, especially for my area where I'm planting, because it's likely that those areas, because they haven't had anything done in 30 years, probably don't have the best soil. So clover is going to provide its own amendment to that soil. It's going to help the soil that I have. It's a perennial, so it comes back year after year after year. The best I've had out of some of my clover plots is 5 years in really, really good balanced soils. I've written it there. Your soil won't be bland. It won't be balanced. If it's your first plot that you're planting, unless you put a lot of egg lime in, you do a lot of soil tests. Even if you do that, it's probably not going to turn out the greatest the first year. Food plots are a marathon. They're not a sprint. They take a lot of work, and it's something you need to invest in a long time. But in the spring, there's nothing better than clover. It greens up the earliest. It's utilized by bears when they're coming out of the dens. Turkeys love it. The deer love it. It's out there in green before any of the neighboring egg fields will ever be up and planted. But because of that, it should only be about 10 to 15% of your total food plot strategy. So don't overplant clover because it's not always the greatest in the late fall. It doesn't come up really high. It doesn't stand above the snow, all those types of things. So it's not always the best. But the great thing about clover, it's easy to plant. So if you get out there, there's a lot less snow here than there is at my place. But if you were to get out there now with a very simple, one of those wheelie spreaders that everybody has, and you frost seeded that clover anytime that there is a freeze-thaw cycle going on in the ground, those small, hard-packed clover seeds are going to work their way in, make enough seed-to-soil contact, germinate, and grow. Clover is simple, easy to learn, easy to plant, easy to grow, needs very limited equipment to grow. But one of the biggest mistakes that people, when I talk to people and they say, oh, I planted, I did totally what you said. I bought a bag of clover blend. I went out, I disked up the area, I planted the clover, and then I disked it in just lightly. And that's your problem. Don't ever disc in a clover. And we'll get into this. I got a little tips and tricks segment, but seeds grow at an optimal soil depth. That's the one thing on the back of the bag I'll tell everybody that they need to follow is the soil depth on the back of the bag. You can't really follow the back of anybody's bag if you buy a bag of seed in Ontario because it's all designed in Oregon or Georgia. And it's not going to work here. But the soil depth is critically important because if you get that little hard clover seed below 1/4 of an inch in the soil, it won't germinate. It'll sit there for years and years until it works its way back up under 1/4 of an inch, and then it's going to germinate. The other thing that people do, they'll say, oh, I worked up this piece of property, and I disked it all up, and I planted my seed, and I came back 3 weeks later, it's covered in weeds. Those clover seeds are very much like our native weed seeds. Those native weed seeds have probably been working into the ground for the last, 200, 300, 400 years. Worth of weed seeds in the ground. And every time you disc it up, you're disking up weeds. That's what you're doing. And when you bring those weed seeds that were pushed down, 3/4 of an inch below the soil, and you bring them up to 1/4 of an inch of the soil, they germinate and grow. So what I always recommend, and this is one of the reasons why I say you should always make friends with a farmer because of our restrictive laws in terms of pesticide use in Ontario, is disc, let it grow, spray with glyphosate, Roundup, kill it down, plant and roll. And that's going to be your best food plot strategy because you're not going to get the regermination of weeds on top of that. Don't disc, don't retill, don't plant, pack, grow. So this is clover. This is typical of a clover blend, what you'd see in a typical clover blend. This is probably white clover. White clover is very popular. It's likely Durana clover, which is very palatable, grows easy in high acidic soils, Deer love it. Looks like grass in there. That's probably forage oats. I don't know for sure. This isn't my plot. I didn't take this picture. But it's likely forage oats. You'll often find legumes planted with oats or forage oat at the same time. It's a very common thing to do. The next thing that I would likely plant is a brassica blend. You're going to see, this is probably what I'll call the king of food plot advertising, is a brassica blend. There's a lot of misconception out there from a lot of people, or what is a brassica? Brassicas are typically that category of plant. They're turnips, forage rape, radish, broccoli, cabbage. Those are all brassicas. Same way deer love to eat your garden, they love to eat brassicas. It's a cool season plant. It's great for our climate here in Ontario. It's typically considered an annual, but most brassicas are actually biannual plants, which means the first year they grow the root on the bottom, the second year they grow the flower and the seed. So most people think, well, if I plant this annual, I'm only going to get 1 year out of it. It's not quite true. You'll probably get 2 years. You'll get a much higher, taller plant the next year. You won't get a root bulb. Animals will utilize brassicas both for the tops and the roots in the ground. It's a fall tonnage plant, though. The way it works with most brassicas, the starch in the plant turns to sugar after a frost. So that's when it mostly gets utilized. But I really believe for us in Ontario that brassicas get way more focus than they deserve. And here's why. This is a food plot. This is my plot. So that's a rape plant. It's a 20-inch tire. So you can see it's way higher than 20-inch tire. And that's what the plot looked like when it first came in. But here's what has to happen for you to be successful with brassicas. This is a chart of first and last frost dates, and that will become your very, very best friend as you plant food plots. I don't know if anybody can see, but in the area that I'm using, I'm going to say latitudinally, it's probably the same as Peterborough. So my first frost date is September 20th, and my last frost date is May 18th. Why is that important? Because the majority of brassicas, they have a days to maturity of between 70 and 120 days. That's how long they take to grow. So if I told you to follow the instructions on a bag for seed, the majority of the instructions on a bag, everybody's bag, is going to tell you for a fall food plot, get out there and plant that sucker the last week of September or the last week of August. If you did that in our climate, you're going to be disappointed. Trust me, I get my seed for free, and I've been disappointed many times because it won't grow after it gets frost on it. So you're never going to get a chance to get your plants up to maturity. And again, remember what we're trying to do is provide forage through the bottom end of summer to get our animals in the best physical condition they possibly can get in, and even potentially have some food through the winter months. So we're not going to be able to do that with brassicas with 120 days maturity, even if they have, say if they have, 100 days. If you back that up from that September 20th, it's June 12th. June 12th, we need to have our food plots in the ground to get the best yields, in the most cases. And that's even going to be a challenge because ideally, like I said before, we need to plant annuals, which brassicas, again, are annuals, when the soil temperature is 15 degrees at 9 a.m. So that's when they're going to germinate the best. So if you put them in before, you risk having them rot or a bird eat them or something like that. So really, we don't have a lot of options. That first or second week of June is what we got. That's where we have to plant. That's in order to do it right. So that's when we need to plant the brassicas. That's why I say they get more focus than they deserve, because on the majority of the bags that you read and instructions you'll read online, they tell you can plant them in August, late July, early August, September, and have a great fall food plant. You can't. They'll be 2.5 inches tall. Nothing will be able to eat them, and they'll be gone. Trust me, I've been there. So tips and tricks we're going to go through a couple more, but that's what I'm planting. Just so everybody knows, that's what I'm planting in my food plots. I'm planting brassicas early, and I'm planting clover. I'm going to go through some more classes of plants in the food plot mixes that are there as well. But here's the tips and tricks. Always prepare a seed bed. So like I talked about before, a prepared seed bed is something that is tilled, raked, whatever it might be, packed down sprayed for weeds, that type of thing. Plant the seed at the recommended depth. So on the back of the bag, for whatever is in it, it's going to give you a recommended planting depth. Please try and follow that planting depth to the best of your ability. That you're going to get the most money out of your seed. Seed is expensive, very expensive, no matter where you buy it from a co-op or you buy it in a pre-mixed kit. Doesn't matter what it is, seed is going to be expensive. Make friends with your farmers for a lot of reasons. One, they're generally nice people. Two, they're going to have glyphosate or Roundup that you can use to spray your food plots. Three, you might just get a place to hunt. And the last thing is anything is better than nothing. Anything you do on a piece of property, like what I have there, anything is going to be better than nothing because there was nothing. There was no food for the animals there. It was simply open hardwoods. And I said this before, but it's always easier to increase the productivity of the acres you have than to create more acres. That's what food plots are about. They're about increasing the productivity of the acres you have versus creating more acres. And that's essentially everything there is to know about food plots, you're afraid to ask. But these are the last types of food blends. I'll take you through them, types of plants that are out there. I'm not going to plant them on my food plot, but they are available. You should know about them. Legume blends. Legumes are popular. Forage soybeans, forage peas, lentils, all cool season cultivars that grow in Canada very well. They're an annual. Everything loves them. Deer, turkeys, geese. Some of the best goose hunts I've had are in Saskatchewan over pea fields. Pea fields in Saskatchewan, the geese love them. It's great summer and fall tonnage, both the plant and the pods and the seeds, but really, really hard to plant. I caution you not to go out and spend a whole lot of money on legumes, either soybeans, peas, unless you have equipment. Unless you have equipment, you have a seed drill that you can drill the seeds into the ground, unless you can till up and prepare the seedbed properly, unless you can spray and control weeds, unless you can get your pH right, I'm going to tell you, you're wasting your money. You're wasting your money on soybeans and peas. Now, if you happen to own a piece of property that maybe a cash cropper friend is using and you can get access to hunt on it, and you can convince them maybe to leave a couple acres for you, it's awesome. It's probably awesome hunting, but it's really hard to grow for a recreational food plotter. This is what soybeans look like in a farmer's field. This is what soybeans will look like in a food plot. Chewed off. The deer love them. That's the other problem we have with legume blends. Deer love them so much that you have to plant so much that the animals don't eat them away to nothing. And that's the other reason I don't typically recommend them, is because they just get hit so hard that it's almost impossible to keep them without protecting them with an electric fence ahead of time. The last one I'm going to go over is grain blends. Grain blends that you typically find in a blend are triticale, forage oats, rye grain, corn. Triticale, if anybody doesn't know what triticale is, it's just a cross between rye and wheat. So it's a cross between fast-growing rye and durable wheat. So that's triticale. So it's a very, very common in most blends. You'll see that name triticale out there. It's tough to grow. Requires just like the other legumes requires inputs. But it is the best winter forage and late season forage out there. Standing cornfields are probably the best thing there is for our animals, in deep snow, because that it's protected by the sheath of the corn. It doesn't get moldy. It stays out there. But not many blends you even find will contain grain blends in them. Very few blends will have grain in it, just because it's really, really tough to grow. So a lot of people won't put it in a bag because of that. And that's it. That's what I have for food plots. So I thank everybody for the time today. And if you have any questions, go ahead, fire away. I'll try and answer them.
Yeah, one thing I have done with my oak trees is I burn wood at home, so I take the ashes up and I spread it around some of my oak trees, and then they seem to produce a whole lot better acorns in the coming years. I don't know if it's from the ashes that make them produce better, they think there was a fire, or what it is, but it seems they do produce better.
Yeah, and it's likely has to do exactly what I talked about, the same as a food plot, is the soil where those oak trees are growing is likely very acidic. And so when you work the ash into the soil, just like any other plant, you're going to improve the soil. So then the more balanced the pH is of the soil, the more nutrient uptake that plant will then take into its system. It'll fruit better and drop more acorns.
Yeah, I don't bother working it in. I just put it on the snow at this time of year and let nature do it.
Yeah, Peter.
I have found over the years that using food plots, if you have your summer blend and you go over about 20 yards and you put your winter blend in, basically the deer just take the next 5 steps over and they'll be there from like late November to December, and it works really good that way.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things they talk about typically in food plots, and when you're start to get into food plots and research, is one of the things they always talk about is never clearing the table. So just like when I talked about having minerals available to your deer for them to utilize, you also, from a food plot perspective, is you never want to clear the table. So that's one of the reasons why, when I mentioned we should only have clover as 10 to 15% of our food plot strategy, is because when the clover starts to fall off and have less production midsummer when the heats come on, you want to have something else in behind it that doesn't clear the table. So you leave the table always with food on it, so that there's always utilization by the wildlife on your property.
Well, if there's no more questions, I'd like you to join me in thanking Shawn very much. I certainly learned a lot today. I hope you all found that to be very worthwhile. Bill Blackwell's already over there telling me I owe him hundreds of dollars for all the food plot seeds we got to put in up in the properties in Port Elgin. So thanks for costing me a lot of money, Shawn.
I got some bags over there.
Thanks for
Thanks, Ron. Appreciate it.